Okay, so the rough outline of this is you can divide it into 4 parts. The first couple of verses is talking about the worldwide kingdom, which is the nature of really part of it. Verses 3 through 5 is talking about the people, the people of peace. It's a little bit of a description, but it's really kind of introducing the fact of the peacefulness of the people. And then verses 6 through 8 is the description of the people. So there's even more description. And then verses 9 through 13 is the prior suffering. That is, before all these things happen, there's going to be some suffering. He's taking a break from the doom and gloom and saying this is what's coming. We have something to look forward to and anticipate, and this is what it's going to be like. It's going to be peaceful. But then he gets right back into what they were going to face. But before that can happen, there's going to be a lot of trouble, a lot of problems. And so this is really what he's dealing with, getting right back into it. All right, let's go ahead and read. I'll just read all 13 verses, and then we'll come back and ask questions about it. It shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and people shall flow to it. Many nations shall come and say, Come, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways. We shall walk in his paths. For out of Zion the law shall go forth, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between many peoples, and rebuke strong nations afar off. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. But everyone shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree. No one shall make them afraid, for the mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. For all the people walk, each in the name of his God, but we will walk in the name of the Lord our God, forever and ever. In that day, says the Lord, I will assemble the lame, I will gather the outcast, and those whom I have afflicted, I will make the lame a remnant, and the outcast a strong nation. So the Lord will reign over them in Mount Zion, from now on, even forever. And you, O tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, to you shall it come, even the former dominion shall come, the kingdom of the daughter of Jerusalem. Now why do you cry aloud? Is there no king in your midst? Has your counselor perished? For pangs have seized you like a woman in labor. Be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in birth pangs. For now you shall go forth from the city. You shall dwell in the field. And to Babylon you shall go. There you shall be delivered. There the Lord will redeem you from the hand of your enemies. Now also many nations have gathered against you, who say, Let her be defiled. Let our eye look upon Zion. But they do not know the thoughts of the Lord, nor they understand his counsel, for he will gather them like sheaves to the threshing floor. Arise and thresh, O daughter of Zion, for I will make your horn iron, and I will make your hooves bronze. You shall beat in pieces many people. I will consecrate their gain to the Lord, and their substance to the Lord of the whole earth. Okay. So let's look at these and think about some of these questions, especially the first couple of verses here. We have several questions from that. What does it say that's going to happen in the latter days? We have, the house of the Lord is going to be established, to be exalted and above all the mountains and beyond the mountains, but it'll be above the mountains. So what is the Lord's house referring to? It says the mountain of the Lord's house. What is that? When you say the Lord's house, what comes to mind when you... Temple? Okay. Does anybody else have temple? What translation is that? New English has temple in yours? Okay. New International? All right. I'd have to look and see. Let me see if it's temple or if it's literal. Sometimes when we have differences like this, we'll have not a translation but an interpretation. And it's possible here. I didn't realize there was a difference. Let me look this up real quick. Verse 1. Let's see here. Micah 4:1. Probably okay. It means literally a house, but could also mean a court, a daughter, a door, a dungeon, a family. So the idea is not temple, the idea is residence. Isn't that interesting? So why would they say temple? It's an interpretation, right? So this is what every translation does this to some degree. This is one of the problems that we run into with translations. It's just the matter of how things work, where you may have a word may have many different meanings, and instead of using a generic word, they will pick one of the meanings. Well, that's really commendable that they're trying to help us understand, but it also can go too far, because what if it doesn't mean temple? What if it means household or family? When I think of house of God, I think of a family. Now, does that mean that we're talking about a family, like a literal family with a husband and wife and children? Obviously not. So the interpretation, then they say, well, this is obviously talking about the temple, so they interpret it that way. But think about what he's saying here, because, in fact, if you look at the flow of this, we think about Hebrew parallelism, where they'll say many things in several different ways, right? So we can kind of see meaning here. It will be established on the top of the mountains. It will be exalted above the hills. Many nations shall flow to it. Verse 2, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, and we will walk in his paths. Okay, so it could be talking about just these, in some sense, the reestablishment of the Jewish order, right? If they want to interpret it that way. All right, so when he's saying this, when you think of a household, we're thinking about what's implied in if you want to use the word house. What does that imply? Or why would he talk about it as if it's the house of God? We're talking about the house of God that's exalted above the mountains. Okay, so it's where you can go to see where God's dwelling, right? The Lord's house. This is where he is. Okay, and there is some camaraderie there that's implied in that. If we're talking about, are we talking about the kingdom of God here? Sure, this is what we're looking for. Now, there's a difference when you talk about the kingdom of God and you talk about the household of God. We're talking about the same thing, but we have two different words to describe it, right? And when you think about a kingdom, what would a kingdom imply if we're talking about if you use the word kingdom, what would it mean for us? Well, it would bring up images of war, bring up images of, fighting in a kingdom and all these different things that relate to that. But if you bring up a household, the house of God, it brings up a completely different image. So the imagery here is one more of peace and not necessarily war, right? So it could be why the differences are used. But anyway, think about this. It's referring to then the family, the idea that the people that are in this is not just a kingdom, but we also consider it to be like family, right? That's kind of the idea. What are the imagery of mountains and hills represent here? It says shall be exalted above the hills, be established in the mountains. This is commonly used in the Bible. What is it usually referring to when it talks about this? Sorry? Okay, we're talking about elevation. So this is going to be something that when we're talking about when God's house, the Lord's house is elevated, that means it's above all the others, right? So we're talking about dominion, we're talking about rank, right? And now in Jerusalem, the high point, the high place of Israel and Judah, the combined nations, was Jerusalem, right? The top of the hills. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that that mountain was literally higher than all the other mountains. I don't know if it was or not, but you could say that it was the highest of all the mountains in Israel, because this is where the temple of God was. This is where the authority of God rested, that kind of thing. So this is the same idea. When the Israelites went into captivity, what happened to the temple? Destroyed, right? So in some sense, they're anticipating, at least from their perspective, they would be anticipating the rebuilding of it all, but we're talking about a high place that's going to be, how high will it be? It's above all, right? It's high in the mountains. It also represents safety, that kind of thing. All those things come into play with it. Where would the people come from who came to the house of the Lord? Many nations, right. Yeah. Does it say all nations? Does yours, any of your translations say all nations? I know this is a really an insulting question, but what's the difference between many and all? Is there any difference? Of course there is, right? So many nations will come. Now, if you think about this literally, if we're talking about a mountain, a literal mountain, and let's say we're going to go to, I don't know, let's go to a mountain in Tennessee. What's a good mountain in Tennessee? All right, that's a range. Do we have a mountain name that we could go with? Mount what? Uganzi? LeConte. Okay, so we have 300 million Americans, and we all assembled on the top of that mountain. Are we all going to fit? I don't know. And then add many other nations on top of that. What if China came over here and decided they're going to go up? Obviously, this is not literal, right? And none of this is written in a way that's literal. Although, if you're going to build a fortified city, you want to put it up as high as you would. You want to put it up as high as you can, especially in those days. It wouldn't matter now, but back then it would have. All right, so this is it's just figures of speech that we need to recognize. And it's going to come from all the nations around. Now, think about this for a second. Let me ask this question first. Why did the people go up there, according to this? Why would people go up to the top of this mountain? To learn, yes. It says in verse 2, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways, and we shall walk in his paths. So we're talking about people who have... Do you think they had to know something about God in order to go up there? Of course. Why would they go there if they didn't have any idea who God was? Now, where would all these nations of people get any kind of idea about God and the idea that they want to actually go and learn from him so that they would go? Think about, from Jewish perspective, how would they learn, how would these nations learn about God? That's true, but most of the world didn't know that, right? So how would the other nations know about it? You're right on the tip of it, yeah. The Jewish people would tell them. Now, why would the Jewish people be spread out all over the world? Because of persecution, because of the sins that they had been committing. The Assyrians came and spread them out all over the world, right? So how would the nations learn about God? God dispersed them, and they would learn about him from that. So whenever Paul, for example, would go from place to place, where's the first place he would go? Synagogue. Why? How did they have synagogues all over the Roman Empire? Because that's where they were put. The Jews were put there. And what did the Jews do when they were so far away from home? You know, could you imagine going back to the temple every week to have Bible study when you're 600 miles away or 1,000 miles away? It's not going to happen. What are you going to do? You're going to gather in places of your own to try to keep up with. Here's something interesting. When the Jews went into captivity, whether the Assyrians or the Babylonians, because we have both places, right? Both of the peoples went into captivity. What kind of people were they when they went into captivity? When that ended, would you say that they were monotheists? Monotheists. They believed in one God. No way. They were taught that, but they didn't follow that. How do we know that? Well, that was one of the reasons they went into captivity, right? Because they were worshiping all these other gods. They just adopted them. And They might have believed that their God was the best, but that's even doubtful too, because they would reject God's laws to obey, these other gods. But they definitely believed in polytheism. Do you know when they came out of captivity, they have never once had a problem with polytheism. It cured them. And the only way that could happen is because they learned their lesson, and they figured out a way to ensure that each generation after that would continue to learn that lesson. And the only way that that's possible is that they would gather together, and as it's stated in Acts chapter 15, they had Moses and the prophets read to them every Sabbath. So this is something that was established. It wasn't even necessarily normal procedure before that, but after the captivity, they came back a different people because they had decided we're not going to lose this again. And that stubbornness is still persistent. It's still there. And they've never had now, I shouldn't say never. I'm not going to say that there aren't polytheistic Jews somewhere. It's a possibility, but as a whole, they are not polytheists. And it's interesting that they had to go to Babylonian captivity. When they went to Babylonian captivity, the Babylonians were monotheists. They didn't believe in the God of the Bible, but they believed in one God. And part of their downfall was the fact that they started adopting other gods as they conquered nations. They started collecting information about these other gods, and that was part of their downfall. Interestingly enough, when the Babylonians were defeated by the Persians, they took the city of Babylon. That place was an impossible place to take. It was literally almost impossible. And the only way the Persians did it, actually, they just kind of walked in the gates. That's what they did. The reason for that is because their last king, can't remember his name, was an avid collector of images from all around the world. He collected all these different gods. And the priests, the monotheistic priests, were livid that he was collecting all these other gods. And so when we have this, remember the image, the story of the God writing on the wall? And that night, that nation fell. While they were all partying and everything, the priests saw the Persians outside, and they just walked out and opened the gates and let them come in. Everyone was slaughtered. And the Babylonian Empire fell in a night because of that. So it's fascinating to me. Now, I'm not saying that they were following God, but they had monotheism, and that was part of the way that monotheism was beaten into the brains of the Israelites, because they got into that circle, and there was a lot of influence from the Babylonians, and that's part of that. So they came out of this, and they finally learned their lesson, and now people are going to be coming from all the nations to the house of God to learn from him so we can walk in his ways. All right, so what is Zion? Let's think about it first literally, because we're going to talk about it spiritually in a second. Where is Zion? Jerusalem is built on several mountain peaks that are close together. And Zion is where the temple was. And this is, when we talk about Mount Zion, we're talking about not just Jerusalem, but we're talking about the temple of God. And there's reason for this. I don't remember if it's tradition or if the scriptures actually state it. I have to look again. But do you remember when David took the census of the people and God was punishing the people? And God said, okay, choose which one of these you want to have happen. And he said, I'll put our hands in the hands of a loving God. And so God started striking the people down, right? And what did David do to overcome that or to change that? You remember? He went and made a sacrifice at the threshing floor of a man whose name I forget. Do you remember what he did at that point before he made the sacrifice? He bought the land. He said, I'm not going to make a sacrifice that doesn't cost me anything. that land is where they built the temple. Well, when we put all these things together, that's Zion, that's Mount Zion, this is the way I understand it. We're talking about then, we're not just talking about the political system of the Jews. We're talking about the place in that whole region where the temple of God was built. So it's emphasis on the spiritual, right? Now, for them, the spiritual and the political were very much overlapped. Although there were differences, they were overlapped. So Zion is not just talking about that imagery. It's not just the politics of it. It's also the spirituality of it, the spiritual part of it. So that's where we need to recognize when he's talking about this. When they go up to Jerusalem, and he says, "For out of Zion the law shall go forth." Okay, so if all the nations are coming to Zion to learn of God, why would the word of God go forth from there to, assuming this is to the rest of the world? Why would it go from there? Logically speaking, there's only one reason. Because the people came and learned, and what did they do after they learned? They went home. All right, so we have a dispersion, again, of information. That if you're going to go and you're coming from all the nations and you come and learn from God and you return home, what's going to happen in all those other nations? You're going to have all kinds of things springing up, lessons learned, and these things coming because they're going home and teaching other people. All right, so look in verses 3 through 5. It says, "He shall judge between many peoples, rebuke the nations, strong nations afar off. They'll beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." Imagery of peace, right? In verse 4, "Everyone shall sit under his vine and under his fig tree." Images of peace. "No one shall make them afraid. The mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken it. All people walk, each in the name of his God. But we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever." All right, so now the image is we have people who are walking in God's laws, and these laws, walking with God, will bring peace to those people. That's what he's saying here. Verse 5 verifies that. Now we have this peace that comes. All right, so looking at verse 3, why would the nations not lift swords anymore against each other? Okay, so we use them, all right, but so why would it be that they wouldn't learn to fight anymore? Learn war. They'll learn peace. What are they learning that's transforming them from these violent people to peaceful people? All right, so they learn to trust God. Yeah. Leaving justice to God. Yeah. All right, so in essence, what he's saying here is when they learn the laws of God, they come together, they learn the laws, they go back home and disperse them. It's going to go out from there to all the places. They're going to learn what? Peace. The world is going to learn what peace is and how to have peace, right? That's the imagery that's being presented here. It's not going to be that all of a sudden the Jewish power is so strong that it controls the rest of the world to have peace. You know, we have peace and relative peace in the world, sometimes more than others. What's maintained the peace for the last, 60, 80 years around the globe? Fear of mutual destruction, yeah. The battle machine of the United States has had a tremendous impact on the peace of this world, right? So we've ruled with an iron fist, basically. Now, that's a little stretch, but that's the idea. Now, how did the Romans enforce their peace? They had peace. They were famous for it. How did they enforce it? Brute force, yeah. Every nation that has ever had peace, it's always been enforced by brute force. Now we have a situation where people are learning peace and not by brute force because they're following the laws of God. All right, that's an incredible lesson for them to learn, and it's going to change everything when that happens, right? So does this indicate that every nation on earth would be peaceful? Does it say that every nation on earth would be peaceful? No. Who are the ones that are going to be peaceful? The ones who learn to walk with God. Those are the ones who are going to have peace. And so, therefore, there's a lot going on here. We need to not read into things. Generally speaking, this is used to talk about the end of time, how Jesus is going to come back and he's going to reign with an iron fist so that there's peace around the world. Incidentally, that's exactly what the Jews were hoping for when their Messiah came, that he would rule with an iron fist and there would be peace in the world. What they didn't get is that you don't have peace through conflict. You have peace by following God. And it's always been that way, and the people that figured that out have lived in peace. But the ones that haven't figured it out have not lived in peace. Okay, number 9. What is the imagery of the vine and the fig? What is it? Why is that about peace? It's just giving a day in the life, right? If you have the time and the luxury to be able to sit under your vine tree, this would be a place where they would recline when it was hot. You can go underneath and sit in the shade. Sometimes this is where people would read and study these kinds of things. In fact, I believe it was Philip or Nathaniel 1, when Jesus spoke to him, he said, I saw you sitting under your fig tree yesterday, right? And this is how he knew that he was the Messiah. So the imagery there is just, it's about peace, living there and living in peace. All right, verses 6 through 8. In that day, says the Lord, I will assemble the lame. According to verse 6, who are the ones that were assembled by God? The lame and the exiled. All right, so let's think about this. In the context of what he's saying in this whole chapter, where were they going to be assembled? Sorry? Zion, yeah. And so these people are going to come, these are the kinds of people who are going to come to Zion. And the lame and the outcast, right? That doesn't mean it's only them, but these are the people who are going to come. And what does it mean then? If you're going to say this, what does that mean? In verse 7, he says, I'll make the lame a remnant, the outcast a strong nation. Maybe a couple ways of looking at it. One of the marks of society, I heard this from a paleontologist, I think, some kind of person who does that kind of work. And she said, we generally think of whether a nation or a people were civilized by whether they can make tools and things like that. But she said, I suggest that you can tell by whether there were skeletons with broken legs that were healed. How's that making you civilized? Medicine? If you care about other people, that's a mark of civilization. And if you see a broken leg, broken femur, for example, you break your femur, how much trouble is it going to be to help you live? A lot, especially without modern accommodations, right? If you're a nomadic people and you have someone who breaks their femur, what are you going to do? Well, you have a choice. You can leave the person behind, or you can help them in some way, probably putting them on something that can be dragged behind a horse or something. So that's a mark of civilization. So here's a marked difference between the nations now, between peoples. That is the people of God versus the people of just, savagery, I guess. We live in a place, in a world that is extremely harsh, right? It's pretty much, we're in it, every man for himself. Now, we've been able to carve out some things in our modern times a little bit better than that, but when it comes down to it, it's pretty much every man for himself. And that's reality, and it's always been reality. And we as a society, if we come together, we can help each other, but we have to be taught those kinds of things. So now we have a kingdom that is set up, a household, a house of God that is set up, and in the tops of the mountains, and God is going to gather the lame Who do you think is represented by the lame and the outcasts? Yeah, the people who have kind of the rejects of society, kind of thing. Okay. The Jewish mentality was if you're crippled, it's because you did something to deserve it. Yeah. I think that's hitting it pretty well on the head. These are the people that society says, you think about when Jesus was on the earth. How did the elite treat the common sinner, the common riffraff, right? Certainly weren't elevated. They were despised, they were rejected, they were just the outcasts. Sorry? Yeah, they were dogs, right. Gentiles were seen the same way. These are the ones that society rejects. All right, so there's lots going on here, but he's saying, I'm going to take you all, and I'm going to build a nation with it. So this would be the people who have been taken into captivity. But think about this. What did Jesus say in the Sermon on the Mount that relates to this? Can you think about that? Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the poor in spirits. Blessed are those who mourn. Lots of those. And in fact, look at the layout. I was going to try to quote them all, and I can't do it. Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are the poor in spirit, theirs is the kingdom of God, of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. Now, in our society now, it's this way to a degree, but it's certainly in the time Jesus said these things. The strong person, the one who made it in life, is the one that's opposite of these things, supposedly, right? And Jesus came and turned everything on its head and said, hey, you don't have to be haughty and arrogant to receive the kingdom of heaven. In fact, it's not about self-promotion at all. It's about being poor in spirit. And if you want to be comforted, there's going to be some mourning involved in your life. If you want to inherit the earth, you want to be the one who receives the blessings of God, it's going to be because of your meekness. So these are the kinds of people that the society would look at and say, these are the outcasts. These are the people that don't really amount to much of anything in life. They're just the lowly, meek people. And we would call them salt of the earth people now. But that's what he says is going to comprise his kingdom. Where are the heroes? Where are the giants, the warriors? And none of that is mentioned here in Micah chapter 4. The things that are supposed to make a nation and a people strong and great, the rich people, God's going to take the mundane and make something great out of. That's pretty awesome. I like that idea because I'm pretty mundane sometimes. Verse 7, he says, I will make the lame a remnant. What does a remnant mean? Leftover, all right? And there's a thing called remnant theology in the Old Testament. And it's mentioned many times, and it almost always relates to the captivity of Israel in the north and Judah in the south, going into the various captivities. And the remnant are the ones who are going to come back to God. They're going to come back to Jerusalem. They're going to come back and rebuild Israel. They're the ones who, of all the people, they remain faithful to God in the times in the difficult times. And there's always a remnant. So when Jesus was saying that there are few who will find it, right? Remember he said that there is a narrow way. It's narrow and straight. It's narrow and difficult to heaven. And he says there will be few who find it. That's the idea. A remnant. Only a remnant of the people of this world are actually going to find truth because they're the only ones. It's only a remnant that's actually going to hold on to truth. And these are the ones who are going to come, by the way. These are the outcasts of society. These are the remnant. These are the ones that hold on. So you and I could fit into that easily if we compare ourselves to the way the world looks at Christians. How does the world see a Christian? It depends on who you ask. I know that. But generally speaking, we're looked down on for various reasons, and we are considered to be crazy in some ways. We're considered to be outcasts in some ways, even though we have a majority in this country. Think about how they have portrayed Christians, so to speak, on television, for example. Generally speaking, either idiots or hypocrites, if not both. Well, there's all kinds of things that people call us, and that's the way the world works. Then look at verse 8. To you, and you, O tower of the flock, the stronghold of the daughter of Zion, to you it shall come, even the former dominion shall come. All right, so we have what is the former dominion? When you think about it from the Jewish perspective, what does the former dominion relate to? Who would you think of as the king that represents the former dominion? King David, undoubtedly King David. And in fact, when they were looking for the Messiah in the first century, they were waiting for someone like King David to be there. They wanted to conquer the world. Okay?
In particular, they wanted the Romans gone.
Yeah, they wanted the Romans gone, definitely. And that was pretty much what it was all about. All right, so now what could this mean when we're talking about the former dominion? How are they going to receive that? We're talking about something that's established on the top of the mountains in Zion that is above all the nations of the earth, and all the nations, or many nations, will come and learn from him. We're going to follow God. This is a spiritual thing we're talking about, not a physical thing we're talking about. And the reason for that is because we're talking about spiritual laws and spiritual things that come from God. All right. Now, verses 9 through 13, we'll kind of hurry through these. Look at verse 10. Be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in birth pangs. And this is considering what do the birth pangs represent? Thinking about verses 9 and 10. It says you're going to go where? Babylon. What does that have to do with birth pangs? All right, so we have hard times coming, and generally speaking, we talk about giving birth to something where it's usually a positive aspect, right? But here, in one sense, they're giving birth. This is the results of the thing. You're going to go into Babylon. But again, these people that came back out of captivity, they were different. They were changed. So this could be representation of that as well. I don't believe it's the new people that God had in mind, but there is definitely something happen, and pain and agony is part of this process. Let's see here. We also have the people here in verses 13 and 4, verse 13, verse 11 through 13. What was going to happen to the people who were rejoicing over the demise of Israel? Verse 12 says he will gather them like sheaves to the threshing floor. Right? They'll have theirs coming as well. And they're going to be punished for the way that they treated those people. All right, so last question, verse number 17. What is the territory of the reign of God today? Two ways of looking at this one, too. We can say he reigns in hearts, spiritually. And what is Jesus Lord of? Everything, heaven and earth. So is Christianity a worldwide religion? Yes. Was Judaism a worldwide religion? Absolutely not. There's a big difference between their reign and the reign of Jesus over heaven and earth. All right, very good. Thank you for your participation.